Professor Nigel Dunnett, thank you for your presentation. It was a pleasure to hear and see what we had there. And you started your presentation by defining naturalistic planting as a function, not as a kind of beautiful image. What is the main difference between the functioning planting and just fake news?
Well, I think a lot of naturalistic or nature-like landscapes have been about making pictures that look natural, but for them to stay looking natural, you need to do a lot of things to them, maybe a lot of maintenance. So that's kind of naturalistic, but I think a more ecological approach to naturalistic planting design is where you think about not just how it looks, but how it works, so how it functions. So it's about the processes of change and succession, and the maintenance is more about guiding that. So you're not necessarily trying to keep things looking the same all the time. You're guiding a process within a sort of character that you want to achieve, but it's a little bit looser because sometimes plants will disappear, sometimes plants will appear, and you have to make judgments. So I think that's the big difference between the sort of work that we would do at Sheffield compared to maybe a more traditional Dutch or German approach to naturalistic planting design, which kind of is a little bit more static. It looks the same from year to year to year.
And you were also talking about the artistic way, or how the planting could be a part of art or one expression of art. How is the function related to art? How do you see that one?
Well, I think it's a really important thing to me, and I've tried to emphasise that a lot, because in the world of more naturalistic or ecological planting design, it has become very, very technical, very, very scientific, and in a little way it's become so technical that I think many people have lost sight of why are we doing this. And for me, the big reason is because of the emotional response that it gives to people. Of course, there are all the ecological and sustainability benefits, and that's really high priority, but a really important aspect is that people really respond hugely positively to it. And I guess that's why I describe it as more of an artful as well as a scientific thing. And I guess my emphasis is on art is that it's not just about making something that looks beautiful or looks pretty or looks nice. It's much deeper than that. It's about making or citing or framing something that provokes this really inbuilt, deep emotional attachment we have to being in, I think, rich and luscious nature. So I think the final thing I would say on that is that, like many people in this field, I would say I'm inspired by nature, but it's only really certain types of nature. It's about dramatic and beautiful, often flowering landscapes, because that's, to me, where the real emotional pull is.
And this leads to the ongoing question about the natives and exotics, which plants we are allowed to use. So what would be your kind of standard answer for that question?
Well, it's an argument within ecological planting design and naturalistic planting design that's been going on for decades and decades, and I kind of thought that with more and more evidence that gardens and garden plants and landscape plants have real benefit to biodiversity and other wildlife, that the kind of ultra native, non-native argument had gone away, but it's really coming back, and in a way, in a much more powerful way, because it's getting into policies now, and they're kind of saying, well, you must do this and you must not do that. The way I see it is that, like much of life, putting things into black and white, yes or no, one extreme against the other extreme, is not the way things really are. That life, as with planting design, is a series of gradients or transitions, and that to say that one thing is good and the other thing is bad is completely false. So I've never been somebody who sticks purely to native plants, both aesthetically, but in particular, I think scientifically, when you start to look at the arguments that are made that native plants are best, then scientifically they just do not stand up. People always used to say, well, they're better adapted to the local climate and the local soils. But when you're working in a city environment, or even a lot of gardens, then the climate is completely different to what you would find outside the city, and the soils are not natural at all. And so to say that the native plants are best adapted is kind of crazy. And when we look to future climate change, even more, is that a crazy thing to say? But even the arguments now that, particularly with insects and with invertebrates, they kind of co-evolve with certain plant species. When you look at the science behind that, you see it's not quite so strong, that there's a lot more flexibility. And I think a lot of the arguments made about native species and biodiversity is about often encouraging the really rare things. And we do this because we want some really rare insect or spider. But things are rare because they're often highly specialized. And I think it's great if we can attract them. But to me, the main objective is to maybe encourage the common things. So we have a really rich, common, adaptable baseline, and then we start to add things which will give us the specialized plants. But at the moment, all the focus is on the rare and the specialized, and we do everything we can to try and support these species, which are often really difficult anyway.
And the question is then, how do we kind of maintain these areas? So you were talking in your presentation about the maintenance costs, that they might not be so high as we are typically expecting. So how can we kind of be prepared for the future changes in that kind of maintenance process? How would you guide our practitioners to do the maintenance in a proper way so that they are not disturbing?
I think to begin with, that's a really difficult question because in the public landscape, we have this kind of trend all the time of money getting less and skills getting less. And so we have to work with that, which means that what we make has to be simple to maintain. Now, that's not a very nice thing to try and support, because I think part of me says, well, we should be fighting for more skills and for more acknowledgement and more profile. And that's part of what it's all about. But at the same time, I want to see kind of plant-led landscapes becoming mainstream and becoming everywhere. And for that to happen, they have to move from being something very specialized to something which can be maintained quite easily. But I think the maintenance is only part of that question, because I think there has to be consideration at the design and establishment stage about the maintenance. So I'm always working from what maintenance capacity is there, and then we work backwards from that. But then the design and the plant mixes help to give you that easy maintenance. And also we plant quite densely, so we have a dense vegetation cover which reduces the amount of invasion from weeds. We try and start where we can with a weed-free, clean surface substrate, so we don't have a lot of things coming up. And I think the final thing I would say with the whole dynamic side of things is that you can be a little bit more relaxed about change. Now that does mean you need people who know about these things, but you don't have to be fighting all the time to take things back to the starting point or to keep things looking neat and as they were last year. So it's about kind of guiding that system again, which does allow flexibility, but it does need somebody in the system who kind of understands that.
Yeah. So then the last question is about the future nature or new nature you were mentioning in your presentation. So if we are looking for the forthcoming changes, what are going to be there anyway, so what should we concentrate on? What are the main topics?
Well, I think partly it goes back to maybe the last question about the maintenance, and I said that, you know, we face everywhere this reduced profile and awareness of the value of planting and landscapes and gardens. So I think part of what I've been trying to do with the practical projects is to make the landscape so exciting and engaging that the profile goes up and more people become interested in it. More people say we want to have this, which means maybe the politicians start to put more money into it. So I guess the concept I have for that is the idea of future nature. That because we live in a really changing and unpredictable world, we can't always take a backwards look about restoration and trying to always go back to something which was before people became involved with anything. I think the really exciting thing is that we have the potential to shape a nature for cities which is adapted to the future changes in a way that people are really happy to live with and to be around. So the concept of future nature, I think, brings lots of ideas in. It's positive, it's forward-looking, but it's about a natural system that's going to work in the challenges we have. And that does mean maybe looking to the past is not the way to do it, because it's going to look different and be different to the past.
Okay, so we have something to do in the future. Thank you.